Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
Great news, we've got a sponsor. This show is now brought to you by Miles Franklin. And when it comes to protecting your wealth, you know there's nothing better than gold and silver. That's what I'm buying. I hope you're doing the same. And once you make the decision to buy gold and silver, there's no better place than Miles Franklin. Look, they've been in business 22 years. And the reason I'm a customer is because when you buy, they ship. Go to milesfranklin.com or call them at 800-822-8080 to get a free quote. 1490 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. If you're wondering whether there's a possibility of saving Social Security, if Food Stamp Nation can ever be reformed, and how we get the government out of this mess that it created, well, Don Watkins works at the Ayn Rand Institute. He's studied this extensively, and he's here to shed some light on the topic. Don, welcome to the Financial Survival Network. It's great to have you on.
Great to be here.
Entitlements, the entitlement tar pit. Is there any way out of it?
Sure. I mean, the basic problem that we have is that government is spending and is projected to spend incredible amounts that we simply can't pay for. And I mean, the key number here is $100 trillion. That's the unfunded liabilities we face, commitments to pay Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, that we just have no projected way to pay for. And so something has to be done. And the question is, what do you do? And there's no question that you have to cut these programs. But even though everybody in Washington agrees, well, something has to be done, nothing's being done. And so you have to ask, well, why is it? Why is it that these programs are a third rail? Why are they so hard to curtail, even as they're leading us off an economic cliff? And the basic reason, I think, I would name two is, first of all, people have a wrong idea of what happens when you cut entitlements. They basically think, well, don't people just kind of fall over and starve in the streets, which isn't true. And then second, they think there's kind of a moral requirement that if you're going to, a compassionate, moral society is one that redistributes wealth to people in need. And I think both of those should be challenged. I think historically you can see that in America, before there was an entitlement state, at a time when we were much poorer, people actually thrived. They thrived by getting jobs, by being productive, and they thrived by, when they were in need of assistance and help, turning to voluntary means of obtaining it rather than reaching into people's pockets. And morally, I think it's complete corruption. Wealth redistribution, taking something that somebody earned and giving it to somebody else, I think that has no place in a civilized society.
And economically, it's a flawed system as well, because every dollar that the government gets, it has to take from producing taxpayers, either directly through taxes or stealthily, and some would say immorally, through inflation, which is the way it's happening now. But the problem is that no politician out there that I've heard of, except for one who we will go unnamed, no candidate for president is talking about cutting these programs, which turn out to produce exactly the opposite effect that they're intended to. Like the war on poverty just created more poor people, and aid to families just broke up families. And that's what government programs do. They accomplish the opposite. So how do you get a politician to muster up the courage? I mean, I know we're heading for a collapse. It's unsustainable, but it looks to me like they're waiting till the collapse occurs when they have political cover to actually start scaling them back.
Well, I mean, it's a tough issue. You don't look to politicians for leadership in this issue, because the basic issue is that Americans have not been convinced that it is right to cut these programs. So long as these things are immensely popular, then no, you're not going to see a politician take action. They're going to push it off and hope that it falls on the head of the next guy until it does fall on the head of the next guy. But you're certainly right. So how do you convince people that these are really awful programs? that need to be changed, and I would argue even abolished. And the basic thing you have to do is, I mean, you named some of the issues. It's important that these programs make us worse off, that economically, when you take money from people in order to hand it to other people, the people you take it from have less money. That is true and important, but it's a much deeper corruption, and you indicated some of the ways. As far as back as Benjamin Franklin would talk about, government trying to bail people out of poverty is destructive, because what it does is it basically pays people not to be productive. It pays them not to work. But just think of what it does to a society as a whole. In a free society, each individual is responsible for his own life. He goes, he's productive, he deals with other people as traders. We both try to make each other better off. You produce what you produce best, I produce what I produce best, and we trade. Now, what kind of society do you get when you have an entitlement society? It's some people living off others. So you have a whole bunch of people being drained of the stuff that they earn, and you have a whole bunch of people who are in the position of parasites. And that is a really destructive phenomenon. And it's why you see, I think, a very widespread entitlement mentality today. And you have the entitlement mentality at the lowest level. So it's the kind of people who say, I have a right to a welfare check. You have it at the highest levels of society, the people who say, hey, I made dumb decisions, but I want a bailout. And you have it in the middle class that says, I want a guaranteed retirement, I want guaranteed health care, I want a guaranteed home. And so that is radically different from how America was 50 and 100 years ago. In the Great Depression, when people were really struggling, FDR, he said, this is really hard to give people handouts because they don't want to take them. So we have to kind of let's have make work programs so at least people feel like they're earning it. Because Americans at the time would, and this is you'd hear if you read stuff from the time, there were widespread sayings. I'd rather be dead in a ditch than go on the dole. Going on the dole was shameful because you knew you were living at some other guy's expense. He was getting up, he was going to work, he was struggling to live his life and feed his family, and you were picking his pocket, and people did not want to do that. And over the course of decades, though, starting in the 20s and 30s, but really taking off during the 60s, that mentality changed. And I think today there's many fewer people who are willing to say, no, I want to support my own life, take responsibility for my own life, and not reach into other people's pockets.
Yeah, it is a bit distressing that morality has changed, that people have been conditioned and taught that it's okay to live at the expense of other people. And, it's amazing, like they're talking about when people finish up their unemployment insurance after 99 weeks, which has become nothing but another welfare program. What do they do then? It's not like they give up and say, oh, I really got to find a job or make some money. They go on disability. And they're not getting quite as much, but they're still getting a good chunk, and that qualifies them for Medicaid if they weren't already qualified for it. And the whole system, in my mind, I don't see any way to reform it short of complete collapse, because there is no political will, and the values of the society have changed so much from back in the 30s when, even then, for instance, if somebody to go bankrupt in the 60s, there was a huge stigma attached to that. No one would ever go bankrupt except as a complete last resort or if they were a deadbeat. And now it's like, hey, everybody does it. No problem. So just short of the collapse, I don't know if there's going to be a consensus of people who say, we have to do this to save the system because we just can't go on this way. And I don't see the event coming that gets people, raises their consciousness enough to know that economic laws are going to do us all in.
See, I don't think it's an event that we need, although those can hasten things one way or the other, not always in a good direction. I mean, as we've seen following the 2008 calamity. But look, so the whole thing with this entitlement mentality is, in America, the only way that got to be widespread is that it was sanctioned by morality. So if you have a morality that says need is an entitlement, well, then the entitlement mentality is completely correct. My life is your responsibility. I do have a right to be taken care of. If I have a need, other people do have a right to fulfill it. So long as I've earned nothing, accomplished nothing, achieved nothing, my life is in their hands and their responsibility to take care of. But if you really but that can be changed, people's attitudes, because Americans also have a sense of individual responsibility is a good thing. They also have a sense of the pursuit of happiness is a good thing. And the person who takes responsibility for his life, makes his own choices, and pursues his own happiness deserves what he earns. And so if you really make a good argument for that, and then make a good argument that, look, what would happen if you rolled back these programs is precisely not that people would go and just give up on life, that most people, what they would do is say, all right, I guess I got to go get a job now. That is exactly the kind of thing that would happen. So you mentioned, the 99 weeks on unemployment. Now, what do you think would happen if you cut that in half? Would it be that all those people would still spend the same amount of time sitting around without a job? Some of them would, but those people, you deserve that fate then. But a lot of people, what they would do is they would say, all right, now I don't have any better option. I better go out and get a job. What about the handful of people who just simply, through no fault of their own, couldn't, even if they tried real hard? That is precisely why benevolent societies have always had widespread assistance, both informal, like help, if my brother couldn't get a job, would I let him sleep on my couch, or would I help him? Of course I'd help him out.
Sure.
And then also formal forms of charity have always been widespread in societies. Now there's a larger question of why there's so much unemployment. Now I would argue that's because of interventions in the economy by government, including the entitlement state. So there's a lot of other issues connected to this. But I think there really is a chance. The Tea Parties are built on that is a widespread phenomenon in America of people who really do think, we should live in a society where people take responsibility for their own lives. So, this is a battle that can be won, but you have to really self-confidently take the moral high ground and say the entitlement state is just not economically infeasible. It's completely corrupt because it's destroying individual responsibility and individual freedom.
Yeah, and individual initiative and the ambition of people is destroyed by dependency. Now, just to switch gears a little bit, because there's a part of the entitlement state we haven't addressed, and that is government workers. That is the army of individuals that carry out the welfare state policies. And just in my little town in Westchester County, New York, we had a policy where these people who ran for town board got paid a nominal salary, but then they could get pensions and they could get health insurance, free health insurance, paid for by us taxpayers. And if they stayed there long enough, if they managed to connive their way to 20 years, or actually 10 years, they'd get lifetime free health insurance. So us taxpayers mounted a revolt, and the crux of our platform was that if you wanted to run, no health insurance and no pension. You had to run on that platform. And it took 3 election cycles. But basically now they're about to pass a law in the town, an ordinance outlawing all pension and medical insurance for any part-time employee, no matter who, whether they're on the town board or pick up scraps of paper. And I think that's like something that has to be addressed also, is that these government workers are getting way overcompensated, overbenefited, and these pensions are breaking the back of every city and state and town and county in the United States.
Oh, I think there's no question. And look, there's always going to be a situation in which when people can get income insulated from market forces, i.e. when government workers are able to get money from taxpayers who don't have a choice, there's going to be some people who try to cash in on that. The problem that we have today is that the government does so much that there's so many people who can cash in on that. Whereas if you had a limited government, then there would be much less opportunity for that kind of thing to arise. If you look at government spending as a percent of GDP, back when America actually had a limited government in the 19th century, at the federal level, it averaged around 3% of GDP. Right. And at state and local levels combined, it averaged about 6% of GDP. Now, I think you can make an argument that that was still too high and that there's no reason why it would need to remain that high. But what is it today? In total, it's around 40% of GDP. So that's just one indication of how ridiculously large government has gotten. And then you have a whole bunch of people who rush in and try to get income. And now I think government workers, there shouldn't be able to be contracts for guaranteed future income. So if you want a pension program, it should just be give them more yearly pay and then they can invest it as they wish. But I don't think you have the right to bind future taxpayers through these kinds of agreements. So I think there's a lot there, but it's true. These are really disastrous. But the fundamental issue is limit government. And then these kinds of issues become less urgent because, if there's 100 government employees in my state, that's a lot less worrisome than if there's a million of them.
Yeah. So, but the whole thing has to be addressed. And I agree with you that the concept that half the population should live at the expense of the other half is repugnant. It's as corrupt to the core as it can be. And those people who actually live at the expense of others are not people who are happy and satisfied and are making the most of their lives. You're really subsidizing mediocrity and failure. And as I think it was Franklin who said it, or maybe Jefferson, when you subsidize, failure, you're going to get a surplus of it. And we certainly have a surplus now. So. I
think that's a great point. I'm glad you. I'm glad you raised that because the fact is that money can buy happiness for a person who earns it. In other words, it adds to a happy life. It's important to a happy life. But a whole bunch of somebody else's money poured in your lap, it doesn't make you happy because the core of what makes a happy person is having a sense of purpose, of achievement, all things that come from supporting your own existence, not just getting a bunch of green pieces of paper that you've looted from other people.
Yeah, well, that's like the thing in school where they try to teach self-esteem, and there is only one way to get self-esteem, and that is personal accomplishment, personal achievement, and it's fleeting. You get it for a while, and then you have to go do something else and get more of it, and that's the problem. Not enough people. You can't teach self-esteem, and you can't give praise to somebody who doesn't deserve it and make them feel good about themselves. It's not going to work. And then we create this narcissistic generation, which is a story for another day, but I'm sure the Institute has a lot of opinions on that as well. Hey, Don, where do we find you to get more information about the Institute and you?
The best place they can go is freemarketbook.com.
Okay, freemarketbook.com. Great. I hope you'll be at Freedom Fest this summer, and we'll talk to you again soon.
It was a pleasure.